I spoke to my mother this morning, and she said, "Oh, darling, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm giving a speech on slavery." And she said, "Oh, darling, keep it light." Anyway, so I'm here to talk about slavery, and that's the slavery of today. Estimates vary, but a conservative estimate is that there are at least 12.3 million slaves today, right now, in the world. So the problem is, not is it there, we know it's there, can we see slavery where it exists specifically? We don't seem to want to know that it's happening everywhere, in our own backyard and our own supply chains. It's in every country represented here today at this conference, unless, of course, you're from Greenland, the singular exception. And frankly, I think that's probably because it's just too cold for the UN to go to Greenland. Many of these victims are found in agriculture and mining, and their labor is found in many of the products that we purchase and rely on every day, such as coffee, chocolate, our clothes, electronics, even the brake pads in our cars. A few months ago, this story broke. 400 Thai workers just rescued in the US. They were working in agricultural production in Hawaii, Washington, California, Colorado, Florida, Kentucky, Massachusetts, New York, Ohio, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah, according to attorneys and advocates. Where are these products going? My grocery store shelf, your grocery store shelf? We have the power to end this in our lifetime. And while corporations have the map that NGOs need, we all have a role to play in supporting the solutions, and there are many solutions. Sex will always sell, whether the story is good or bad. But we need the media to cover the issue proportionately. And we need media outlets to set aside their fear of losing advertising revenue and articulate how businesses can use their supply chains as the map to illuminate the worst areas of poverty in the world where slavery and trafficking take hold. We need to articulate that the CEO is most often not the criminal, that the criminal is the criminal, and that this is criminal activity tainting their supply chain, most often around source materials, just as shoplifting is criminal activity occurring at the other end of the supply chain, at the point of purchase. We need companies to come to the table and collaborate in finding better solutions, in creating better solutions, to work with governments and the NGO community who can offer victims safety and rehabilitation and can assist vulnerable communities. We cannot accurately and efficiently access victims without the assistance of companies that influence infected supply chains. Part of this will require turning tide against pressures to purchase at absolute lowest prices. But the supply chain itself creates the map we need to find the victim. Consumers can support businesses that are creating best practices, using their purchasing power to encourage them to bring their expertise and knowledge of supply chains into the equation. Investors can influence corporate governance and social responsibility practices, providing incentives to companies to elevate human rights and place them at the heart of their strategy.
Julia, you've given a great overview of the breadth and the depth and the true horrific, the level of just how horrible this practice is. What is it that companies can do? What is it the people in this room who work for some of the major multinationals on the planet, what is it they can concretely do to help bring about the end of this practice?
Part of it, for me, is for the companies to engage, and that's what the bill is designed to get people to do. And that engagement can lead you to share your practices, because you know your supply chain better than anybody else. You know your supply chain and its idiosyncrasies better than a company who's a competitor. You certainly know it better than the NGO. You're going to come up with innovative solutions that we can't deliver. So you carry on doing what you're doing, but share it with the NGO who can point out, here's the victim, here's how we find them, and have everybody work together. I think it's for all of us, the NGO community to get off a kind of high moral horse, and companies to open their hearts and minds to the fact that this is in your supply chain.
We've referenced a few times this new legislation, the Transparency in Supply Chain Act of California 2010. Now this act, this law that comes into force in January 2012, is this landmark legislation, do you think, Julia?
No. I mean, legislation is legislation. What we did was try to focus on ACID is a small organization. We try to figure out what's the cascade thing that we can do that will unlock what currently feels like an impasse. How do we create a tipping point that will spur everything into a different enabling environment? So from this, you have 3,200 companies who've been closed doors, not sharing practices, unless they voluntarily do it, which is very few people, very few companies. Now, everybody has to tell us what they're doing all at once. Everybody has to come out together. And that creates this opportunity for coalitions to come together in different industries that is already starting in the tech industry and cotton industry, cocoa protocol. So that's what we need in companies to come together and leverage together their influence all the way down the supply chain. I also think we have to challenge ourselves to engage when the going gets rough. It's not just about going to 6 different suppliers and saying, well, if you don't live up to these practices, then we're going to buy from somebody else who's at the same price. Stay where it's bad. Because closing down a factory in Thailand and moving and doing the same thing somewhere else doesn't actually drive best practices. It doesn't help the poor people on the ground.